Hello and welcome to another episode of The Savvy Entrepreneur. Today I'm with Marta Loachamin, who is running for the Boulder County Commissioner position. Marta, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for inviting me. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, likewise. So, for the audience members who haven't seen or met you yet, can you please introduce yourself and talk about the position that you're running for?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Marta Loachamin. I am a resident here in Longmont in Boulder County, and a little bit about me from who I am. I am a real estate agent here in Longmont. I have worked around the Front Range in Boulder County for many years, since 1999, when I got into that kind of the industry of housing advocacy, both from a mortgage perspective and the real estate side. So I've been self-employed for the last 20 years. So, when you and I have talked a little bit about what does that mean to be an entrepreneur, I'm sure we'll touch on it in some realms. And at the same time, I have also been a teacher. I've taught overseas in Ecuador and here in St. Vrain Valley School District. That was just one of my passions. I am all in for education in different formats, and I use that in a couple different ways in my volunteer work and community work as well. But to be able to be in a classroom and learn about that institution from just not a parent standpoint, because I'm also a parent. I have two boys. I'm a single mother. And so my walk in Longmont's been very personal. I've been very involved in a lot of different realms with community work. I'm on the Longmont United Hospital Board of Directors, and give back in that way also around health. It's all connected when we talk about health and housing, and some of the other work that I've done that we'll talk about, I'm sure. The position I'm running for is Boulder County Commissioner District 2, which just means I live here in Longmont, which is part of District 2. So I can run. There's an open seat. But the kind of one of the big misnomers is that all Boulder County voters do choose the commissioners. So both of our open spots in 2020, all Boulder County voters will have an opportunity to choose their candidate.
So, even though there are three seats, all of Boulder County votes for all three? Is that how it works?
Yeah, and we've got three commissioners who really serve basically like CEOs of Boulder County government as a team. So some people call it and consider it as a board of county commissioners, which makes sense from a business perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And District 3 was recently, kind of transitioned over, and so Matt Jones is not up for re-election because he's still in the middle of his term, at the beginning of his first term. And the other District 1 and District 2 are term limited.
So, what's the process of running for office? Can you talk to me about what you had to do in order to get on the ballot?
Yeah, I mean, the process, that seems like a big one, but just to get on the ballot for me, so there's a couple different pieces, because my life's work has been about community. It has been in volunteer capacities. I feel like I'm probably a pretty more typical voter from the standpoint of I'm also a single mom, and I've got multiple jobs, and I'm working on my life and volunteering in my kids' schools and places that feel really important over times in life, right? And so my work has not been connected to a party per se. I've always shown up for my candidates and worked on local campaigns and things like that. But my life's work has been about people and community versus a party specifically. And Boulder County has a really interesting dynamic when you look at the politics historically of party folks to keep party folks in that circle and really support. And that piece of the process of running for local government has been really fascinating. We hear about it at a national level. We've got a lot of people have been, really upset. 2020 has been a tough year in a lot of different ways. But when we look at our slate of candidates from a national level and definitely here in the state, we've had the most diverse candidate, slates ever in a lot of different positions. And I think we need to pay attention to that here at a local level also. And so the process from a standpoint, I went through Colorado Emerge, which is a program that really boasts their interest and enthusiasm for supporting women candidates specifically to run for any type of office. So I went through that training last year in a 6-month intensive program. And that was really where I learned some of these process pieces, and not just about how to have an interview, but also what does it mean to be a woman as a candidate, because we may touch on that. You probably touched on that in your program separately, is just what does that mean to be a woman in leadership in the United States? So some of those pieces. And then the question that you asked about, how did you get on the ballot? So for me, because of all those different pieces, it didn't make sense for me to go through a traditional route. You have a couple different options when you want to get on a ballot. And one of them is going through a caucus process. Have you ever been to caucus?
Yeah, it's quite an experience.
It's quite an experience, yeah. And so, but when I look at the caucus process and I look at just locally, we have 330,000 residents in Boulder County. And the caucus process typically is a few thousand people that show up. So you're talking about maybe 1% of our county residents who go into those gymnasiums or into the school cafeterias or wherever it is and have 8 to 12 hours of their life that day to be there and really be part of making the decision of who leads our county or whatever, the ballot initiatives, whatever caucus you're caucusing for. But what's so interesting to me about that, and certainly now really completely in the process, is realizing that group of people tends to be the group of people in other community groups in other places that are really adamant about deciding who's going to run. And so for me, it was really important to go the other process, which is petitioning on. And so it was out talking with community members and letting them know, hey, I'm not status quo. I'm not establishment candidate. This is truly grassroots. And when I talk about grassroots, it's kind of like organizing a business. You're starting from zero and building something. And so I'm really excited about that piece of this race because in January, at the end of January, the time is really short about when you can go out and get signatures. But we gathered 80 community volunteers and a lot of folks who'd never participated in any campaign, even a ballot initiative campaign. And they came out and we went out and got signatures, over 1,700 signatures to get my name on the primary ballot. And we did it in 2 weekends, Talis, which is really remarkable. And it's really exciting, especially as a first-time candidate. And that also speaks to the bigger conversation about how do we engage more people in this process versus the typical little circle relative to the full population, right, of who's involved in these types of conversations. So that's the process I took to get on the primary ballot.
That's very impressive. With COVID and everything, I was concerned that, with the signatures being required, that is a pretty big barrier, right? I mean, you can't really go out to Main Street and start walking up to people and saying, hey, sign this piece of paper for me.
Well, and it was interesting because, January 21st was the first day that we could go out to start getting signatures. So it takes organization, it takes planning, it takes groups of people, and we were ready, and so to be able to do that in 2 weekends turned out to be even more important than the method and the strategy to get on the ballot, period. Meaning the turn-in date was March 17th. And as you know, here in Colorado, our first case of COVID was March 5th. I was sitting in our hospital boardroom that morning, early before we heard the news about Colorado's case. But within a few days, I made the decision we can't go out for exactly what you're talking about. Other campaigns were still out, talking to folks and trying to get signatures. And I just was so glad that we'd gotten that done. We were already outdoor knocking by then, but we just stopped it because I felt like the risk is too big. And that's one of the things leaders have to do is, make some decisions. And so it became more important that we had gotten it done than what we had realized for different reasons later.
It's a big sacrifice you guys are taking. It could potentially have been a big hit to your campaign. How are you guys compensating for the fact that you guys can't do the traditional campaign strategy?
Yeah, so the people have asked me that a little bit. And there's two things, and this is my first time as a candidate, so everything has felt a little steep because it's a new process and it's running around in circles trying to figure out who's the right person that can send me this document or who can tell me how do I do this. That has been really what people go through in the beginning of anything, whether it's a business or something like this. And to add then on top of that, this reality that we're in was tough. It was tough because outside of just being on a campaign, which to me is the most public job interview ever. So that in itself is really, another layer of when you just want to serve. And then yet you've got people really very critical of all these different pieces that you wouldn't normally go through for this type of a job. And then to add on to it that we've got this global pandemic and the reality that I'm also a mother and I've got 2 kids and I lost my job and they lost their jobs and they're had to go to school online. There's all those layers of just being a person right now in COVID-19 that I don't think people are really talking about and really addressing. And I also feel that that's really dangerous from a health standpoint, from a true community health standpoint. And I saw it, and I think we'll talk about it in a little bit in my work during the flood as a community member, as a volunteer with Light Frog, and then as a hired resiliency specialist for the city about the myths really in taking care of mental health and personal health during crisis. And so that concerns me a lot about where we're at right now. And so from a campaign leader standpoint, it was like, okay, all I need to do right now is just call my volunteers and check in on them. This is not the time to call and ask for money, but that puts a cramp in a campaign for sure. So you're right, all these different layers and now going virtual and as a first-time candidate, trying to get a platform when people don't want to be related to a candidate, don't want to seem like they are endorsing, aren't sure on those types of pieces. It does add some layers, and it's a great challenge.
Yeah, it's a great transition to the next point, which is let's talk about what you've done previously for the community, and let's just juxtapose that against what the current members of the board, if you will, are doing, and why you see yourself as a better candidate than who is already there.
Sure. So just to be clear, I'm not running against any current county commissioners. So there's not an incumbent in the race. So my race isn't about, oh, I'm going to be better than, the current commissioner because she's done amazing work. Both Elise Jones and Deb Gardner have really championed these issues around climate and environment, sustainability, affordable housing, which are all topics that are really important to me in my personal life and my work life, et cetera. So just to clarify that, but what I do believe 100% is that my skill sets and my work are a variation of those topics connected to a broader and wider group and community. What does that mean? It means that when we are talking about all of these community needs, all of the community issues, it's also with a lens of being a parent. It's also with the lens of being a teacher. It's also with the lens of sitting on boards nationally and here locally in the realm of housing advocacy and healthcare. And those are perspectives that are really unique because, as I shared before, my journey to this position has not been as a state legislator. My journey to this position has not been working on becoming an elected official. It's been about working with community and understanding institutions. And every place that I've been, I have created some type of an institutionalized change to make sure that systems work better for everyday people, for working families, for kids and youth throughout our county.
That's great. So the commissioner position, however, does have a lot of finance and business requirements. What makes you capable of performing the activities required? I mean, a $430 million budget and 2,000 employees, that's a pretty big lift for someone who doesn't necessarily have that direct experience.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. So when you think about, again, there's 3 county commissioners, and so it's really a team, or it should work as a board together in oversight and allocation distribution of that $430 million budget. My goal, just from being in that commissioner's hearing room, presenting data and work that I've done, participating with other hearings and just being in the room, is to create a more transparent and accountability method or accountable method of how do we let community members know where that funding is allocated and what's the difference from one program to another? So I'll give you an example. One of the projects that I worked on around flood recovery that I mentioned was a Resiliency for All work. And so when we went to the commissioners and presented that data assessment and let them know what community needs were, what the community recommendations were, what we really felt like was going to be critical to continue responding to those community members here locally. The next group went in and for county employees and asked for a budget to connect to that. And the piece there is then, how do we make sure that if for every $100,000 that's given out from commissioner's budget, as an example, for whichever data assessment or whichever study it may be, how do we then let community members know, how is that money used? What were the outcomes? Did that group really move the needle? If someone's telling us that they're going to support a sector of community, whether it's our IDD or it's our LGBTQ or it's our Latino community, how do we know as residents where that money is being spent and if it's really being effective for the community members that it's saying it is? And that, I think, Alice, is going to become even more important after COVID, when we look at budget cuts and people had the right to know before, and I believe it's going to become even more critical now. And so my background in banking and finance and mortgage and real estate, being self-employed, running budgets, being my own CEO, building a company with a group of other 20 organizers is the how do I sit in that room and work on those types of decisions.
It's a great answer, and I applaud you for your ambition. So can you let's talk about what it is like for a woman to run for office. I mean, you're obviously a younger person. You don't have the gray hairs that some of the other candidates have. Do you want to talk about not just being a younger person, but also being a woman candidate?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things because it's interesting because I think people look at me and think I'm a lot younger than I actually am, which is great. And it also plays kind of that double piece here, exactly what you're talking about, because I've had people tell me, you're too young to run for this position. And then I have to remind them that I actually have a 22-year-old son. Like, I've lived a life. I have an experience, and parenting in its own as a woman and as a single mother is a whole other career that we don't value, that we don't give credit to, that we don't pay, we don't respond to for women across this country and around the world. And so I say that, just as a reminder that that's one piece that we just don't even recognize on the resume. Our CVs would look really different if raising successful and contributing youth was part of that, right? But being a woman candidate, it's really fascinating the way that we talk about this in the training that I do with Emerge. Just some of the perceptions when we look at a woman candidate and then our counterpart. And it's something that's really ingrained in us. If you think about, I talk about this a lot in my financial literacy work and just business conversation about the fact that less than 5% of our Forbes 500 companies are led by female CEOs in the United States. Just that right there tells me that we have a real gap in our understanding of how women lead. And I, of course, do a lot of research and a lot of conversations around that same topic. But the reality is that a woman and a man who are standing up in front of folks in a candidacy, there is an ingrained perception that a man is the leader. And that's something we've unfortunately really built up over a long time. As a candidate, we realize and we see time and time again that our counterparts can go up in front of a room and talk about sacrificing their time with their spouse or sacrificing their time with their kids that night so they can be in front of this room. And I've seen it and I've heard it, and it's shocking because I, as a woman, could not go up in front of the room and say the same thing. The perception from public is very different.
Really?
And if you think about even when you see a man with a stroller down Main Street, the reaction is very different. Woman, she should be pushing that stroller because those are her kids and that's her job and that's what she should be doing. But we see a man on the other side of the street and that's sweet. and look at all that time he's giving, and wow, he must be amazing. Does
Hmm.
that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure older generations feel that way. I mean, I don't personally feel that way when I see a man. I mean, just the other day, I saw two guys pushing the strollers, and I wasn't like, "Oh, wow, good job, guys." I was like, "Oh, well, okay, this life." And same thing with female candidates on stage. I mean, the Democratic uh, Party had what 3, 4 women running for president. I mean, Warren was leading for a while, and now it looks like Joe's going to pick a female candidate. So I hope things are improving. I do agree with you that that is an issue for older people perhaps, but I'm hoping that some younger people can look past that and not have that sort of stigma, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and that's a perfect point. I think that's the change in the way that voters and just people in general perceive the world is changing, absolutely. And then we have to look at our voting numbers. And when we look, when we talk about it from a candidate standpoint, is who's the larger voter electorate, et cetera. So there's another conversation there. But if it's a group that tends to be an older group of white voters in the county, what is their lens of leadership? So it's a fascinating look, and we'll see how things kind of develop over time, and hopefully, like you said, things will change, and we'll have women candidates. Won't seem like, oh my gosh, it's a woman candidate. It'll feel like it's another candidate who's qualified and could help our community or in this position, et cetera. And that's, I think, what a lot of us are trying to get to, because being in the first thing is not sustainable. We need to jump over that and just have great candidates.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned that you're not running against anyone who's currently on there, but I'm sure you're running against somebody. Do you want to talk about why you're better than the other candidates who are running for your position?
Sure. Yeah, you're right. I mean, inherently in that primary, and in my primary, there's 2 of us that are running for the Democratic nomination. And I think that's one of the biggest questions, kind of as we're getting closer to the primary, people are asking about, okay, what's the differentiation? Like, how do you're both Democrats, you probably have similar Democratic values. And that's true. And so the differentiation for me, for this role specifically, is about the fact that I have qualifications that could be true assets for the role of county commissioner. That when we talked about that $430 million budget, that budget's connected to all our major departments in the county. And most people I talk to are like, oh yeah, no, I don't do anything with the county. It's not. And then you realize that it's connected to open space and land use and public health. And public health sounds like this, and especially right now, that's we're hearing from public health. But public health is also when our food gets inspected. And I bet a lot more people read that list or hear about it than you think, oh, that's part of the Boulder County budget, et cetera. So it's Boulder County, public health, housing services, human services, the jail, all of those pieces fall under that same budget in the county commissioner purview, as well as you mentioned, the 2,000 plus Boulder County employees. And that, for me, having come from the banking background and from finance and in the mortgage world, and as a real estate agent from a residential standpoint, about 90% of my clients over the last 20 years have been and continue to be monolingual Spanish speaking families. All of those different pieces are really connected to that role of county commissioner, from how do we address human services? How do we make sure that our employees are really taken care of? From different board work that I've done, those are things that we oversee from the board seat. We're looking at employee day to day. We're looking at how things are managed, looking at really interesting strategies to connect and bring people together. And that's going to be even more important as we rebuild after COVID-19. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to talk about some of those pieces more specifically, if that.
Yeah, I actually would like to explore public health a little bit. And there has been, Colorado's been in the national news recently. I was watching Rachel Maddow the other day, and she had a whole episode about Greeley and the meatpacking facility in Greeley and how there's 8 deaths there. And they stopped testing because they were getting such high rates of COVID from the employees. Do you want to discuss that topic and how you are going to protect Boulder County from the kind of reckless actions of our neighbors?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple pieces there. I think there's one, we don't have jurisdiction over any of our neighbors, unfortunately. That's just a reality. It's like me coming in and saying, I'm going to be a county commissioner, and now I'm going to go tell the school district how they're going to teach their kids. There are separate jurisdictions, and I feel like there's this piece of realism as well in a county commissioner seat that is important when we talk about the real role. And there is the ability to be in conversation, and I think this regional work is going to become even more important as we, again, rebuild from where we're at right now. And knowing that we can't make our neighbor do something else. We can't make our neighbor stop fracking. We can't make our neighbor treat their community members the way that they should, but we can lead by example. We can influence. We can share our data. Those are things that we can do. And when you talk about JBS Swift and that particular organization, we have to remember that in Boulder County, we used to have the turkey plant here on Main Street that closed around 2008. That was a major factor in compilation with our mortgage crisis and the devaluation of property and the predatory lending, all those different pieces that affected specifically our Latinx community. And I was there. I was in the middle of that. I was helping families address foreclosure, modifying loans, the job loss, all those types of pieces. So and I say that because we're really quick to look at our neighbors and look at other organizations, but I am confident that if we still had Conagra here in Longmont, we would have had a very similar situation, which is unfortunate. But the reality is that we have organizations all over who are putting profit before people. And so where else did we miss the mark? And I think that's really important to look at what happened at JBS Swift and say, yeah, that's not right. The governor does need to go in and require testing if that organization is not willing to do it to be able to protect workers. And where's the data in Boulder County? Because we're starting to see some of that data that would indicate that we have our own issues of who's most affected. And so how are we from our own county going to address those pieces long term, create more trust, build more relationships with folks so that they will go to the county and that will go to public health or whichever it's going to be in the future. And it might be Office of Emergency Management. It might be another organization that needs our communication with all its residents.
I do want to dig a little bit deeper on that, though, because just because it's in Weld County, a lot of their employees, I'm sure, live in Boulder County, may even live in Longmont. How are we protecting our community from the actions of our neighbors?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. The reality that we have folks living and working on all over is important. I don't know that that's a county commissioner jurisdiction, just as a general conversation of what do we do and how we do it. That's kind of where I'm at. I feel like we lead by example and we ask for and we influence those pieces, and we make sure that what are we doing in our county to ensure that our health workers are, for example, in our nursing care facilities, and have we done all the testing and all the contact tracing and all the way that we can? Because for us, it's not the JBS Swift, it's not a meat packing plant, but we do have higher numbers in our nursing care facilities. So if we found a way to control that or to try and get, maintain that, have we shared that with an organization like JBS? I say that because I tend to think, okay, what do we need to do internally before we go out and tell people how to do it or what to do?
That's a very good point. So what is the current situation of nursing facilities here in Boulder County? I know here in Longmont there's several substantially large ones too. What is the current status of those facilities?
I haven't looked at the data in the last couple of days, but I know that the numbers were higher for the nursing care facilities is kind of where our Boulder County numbers were at the top, and that makes me question, have we got that fixed? What are we doing? And I know Boulder County Public Health has done a great job of trying to get the information out as much as they can, and we still have gaps of communication in our own community. One example is, the initial information both from the state and from the county was around COVID-19 was go to our website. And when you go to the website, it was a Google Translate. The information that was on there was incorrect for our Spanish residents. So again, yes, I'm concerned about our neighbors. I'm concerned about the different pieces that are happening there. And I'm also really concerned, which I believe is where my purview is to start, is what are we doing in Boulder County to work with, support, and care for all of our residents as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So are there contact tracing efforts being made currently in Boulder County?
I just I read and just responded to an article that was addressing that same topic in regards to specifically what was brought out. It was in last Sunday's paper, a conversation, an article, and I'm not sure if I'll get the title right, but it was about health officials meet resistance was the title. And the conversation was about Boulder County Public Health needing to get information to be able to do contact tracing with folks who've been either have contracted the virus or who are assumed to have contracted the virus. And the article was really pushing on while we've got, and it really did pull out, we're not getting, we're trying to get information from Spanish speakers and they're not telling us what we need for contract tracing. And just that lens in itself, just that kind of accusatory, like, hey, we need this and these people should be doing this. And that for me, it was very problematic because it doesn't come from a lens of, hey, we're a local government. We need this information. And for some reason, there's a gap here. So now what can we do differently? What have we missed? Because it is critical information. So how are we not expressing that? Or is there a lack of information somewhere? What's our part? So that's what I know, but I don't know the details of how they're doing the contract tracing. It looked like they had 20 people on staff, if I remember correctly, that were, I'm assuming, making phone calls, etc.
Well, it's good to know that they're putting an effort in, because I hadn't heard any effort being put into the contact tracing.
Yeah, and I hadn't either. That's what I read in the article. I was like, oh, okay, so it is happening, but it didn't seem like, kind of like what you were just alluding to. I haven't seen it out there as, hey, this is something that we're doing. It seems like it's other places are doing contact tracing and it might be successful. Yeah. And I wasn't aware of it either. So I think that's,
So do you have any policy proposals that you want to get on the books right as soon as you get into office, assuming you win?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple different pieces for me, and we talked a little bit, just really briefly about the platform pieces, and I think those are connected, right? For me, there's a piece around, from my wheelhouse and my experience around housing, and we talk about affordable housing, and for me, and I've gone to different city council meetings over the years. I've sat on housing task force for the city of Longmont and committees, et cetera, and there's two different ways to talk about housing. One of them is affordable housing. And it's almost, this is interesting because being in the housing industry, it used to be that we would literally, I used to sell homes in Greeley for $80,000. People, and so the word affordable means different things to different people. But when we talk about affordable housing from a government standpoint, we're talking about subsidized housing in some form. So somebody's getting subsidies, whether it's developers or whether it's organizations or it's the land trust or deed restricted, something. So that's one way to do affordable housing. Part of the regional housing plan requires that we continue that and that part of my job as a county commissioner will be to make sure that happens, because I believe that's really important. And at the same time, one of the things that I've been really talking about, which is back to, policy and how do we change that, is really looking at home ownership in a way that will create housing opportunities for folks. And people say, oh yeah, I can't home, and I get it, because the average price right now, people don't realize, in Boulder is $1.7 million. And I'm still helping homeowners buy houses. And so part of it is this conversation about affordable housing with subsidies and accessible housing. And I talk about accessible housing because we have to, I believe, and one of the pieces that I'm going to be working on is we have to get Boulder County back to a place where builders will build condos and townhomes, because that is truly the first step for most people to get into home ownership. Just building apartments. We have a lot of apartment permits, Talis, that have gone up all over. There's a lot of proposals for apartments. And for me, an apartment doesn't help a resident in our county build equity. It doesn't help them start planning for life emergencies like this. It doesn't help them start making life plans for their family or themselves. And certainly it doesn't help them feel like they're part of community. So I just think we need to lens in a new way, and without housing professionals, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, that's true. I'm going to push back a little bit. I moved from the Bay Area to Colorado because there was no chance of me buying a house in the Bay Area. I bought a house here in Boulder County, paid $250,000 a couple of years ago. Got it reappraised recently, hasn't gone up to that 1.7 number that you alluded to, although I would be happy if it did. But I think that there are other ways to do this. People can move to cheaper areas. I mean, it's cheaper in Arkansas than it is here. Just like how I moved from the Bay Area, people can move from Colorado to cheaper areas. I mean, that's the blessing of technology. People can work remotely. There's less barriers to moving to different areas. There's a ton of ways for people to find cheaper areas. Doesn't mean that we should make it cheaper here in Boulder County. The other thing is, how many landlords do you know with 10 plus properties? How is that helping the situation of people owning homes? It's not. By people owning all these rental properties, it's increasing the cost to acquire these homes because their capital expenditures are very low. I mean, their capital costs are very low. They have tons of money that they're bringing in, and they're swooping up all these properties, cash deals, sight unseen. And that, I think, is a bigger problem for home ownership than apartments, because if you look at college students, there's low chance a college student's going to have the finances to buy a house, right? So, I mean, you got to look at the demographics a little bit. So, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
That's one of the pieces where I was going with the accessible housing that I talk about a lot from a housing professional standpoint, and working in the, after the foreclosure crisis, there's a policy that I've brought up over the last, 12 years, about how do we do this in a local level, is what was used after the mortgage crisis. A lot of banks, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, had used a first look initiative. And to me, that's the type of policy that addresses what you just talked about. We lost a significant opportunity. Those policies mean that, let's say that you and I are going to go look for a home. We're both qualified home buyers. We want to live in Boulder County. We both work in Boulder County. We're either teachers or first responders or have our own small businesses. If I'm an investor and I have cash and I'm not going to live in the house, I'm going to do exactly what you just talked about, and you're somebody who wants to live in the house, then the first look initiative gives you the right to look at that property and put in an offer. And sometimes it's 5 days, sometimes it's up to 14 days.
Yeah, but that's not going to help anything, because what if the home person who's selling the property is like, yeah, sure, I have to take these offers initially, but if I wait 2 weeks, I'll be getting these giant cash offers, then what's stopping them from waiting 2 weeks for the cash offers? What I think would be better would be to change the tax system on rental properties, making it much more expensive to have that as a asset class so that they're not just buying all these properties and holding on to them for generations and just extracting rent. Rent seeking in economics is not a good term, and but people seem to be okay with it in housing.
Well, and there's another piece of that I've been investigating too around the accessible housing, because again, in Boulder County and historically, the knee-jerk reaction has always been about building something. The other piece is exactly what you've already mentioned, is that we have vacant properties. We have vacant properties right now in Boulder County, and I've talked with some property owners, I've talked with some nonprofits, and they would love to take over those properties and just open those in different ways for senior housing, for workforce housing, for transitional housing. We have, groups like the Reentry Initiative, who they're trying to get ready to bring on new clients, and now they're in a different situation after COVID. But in my conversations a few months before this, they were starting to look at some other property acquisition and some other nonprofits. That's the other way that, to me, with a housing professional lens, we utilize some of this vacant property, because there's landlords like you're talking about that are also done being landlords, and they don't have to sell those properties. And if we can incentivize and create opportunities for collaboration, there's ways to create some open doors without even having to have the build conversation. And those properties are already within infrastructure, and they're already connected to transportation and all of those good pieces. And the other one that I think is really important is creating a gap down payment assistance program. We've done it before in financing world. We've seen those programs, and they can work really well. And that means, because you've got folks who either make too much money and can't get any assistance, but still can't really buy that $1 million home, there's these people right in the middle. Like, you either make way under and then you can get assistance, or you make too much. This group in the middle needs some down payment assistance that's not going to raise the purchase price. And that's the other piece of historically how it's
True. Down payment assistance is a great program, but I don't think it attacks the structural issue of people owning way too many properties and trying to seek rent when they shouldn't. I mean, what percentage of the homes in Boulder County do you think, homes and condos, are owned by actual homeowners, and what percentage do you think are owned by speculators or investors?
So when I started this race in November 2018, I did have somebody pull that number for me, just in a business, and there were 25,000 housing units in Boulder County that were non-owner occupied. So that's the number that I've been talking about on the campaign.
20.
Use those properties. How do we give landlords an opportunity to either sell those to homeowners who are going to live in Boulder County? How do we let them turn those into some type of deed restricted housing? How do we let them turn those into some type of a transitional program with some of our nonprofits? That right there is not the only way we're going to address the housing issue, but it's a way that we haven't done it previously. And so those are the pieces I want to move forward with, using my relationships and expertise and connections with property owners, with property managers, with HOAs, with the real estate organizations. That is a very different lens. So when you talk about differentiation, that is very different than any other county commissioner from a relationship standpoint and a background in housing to start doing something different and something new, which is what it's going to require.
I commend you on that. That is very impressive that you had foresight to go and do all that research on property, because it is a big issue, and I don't think enough people are talking about it. So kudos to you for bringing that issue up and being a real leader in that issue.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, and the reality is that housing is connected to everything. Because without safe and stable housing, people don't have the energy or the security or the time to start working on climate issues, to start working on the environment, to start working on, is my neighborhood sustainable? If you aren't sure where you're going to sleep tomorrow night, the expectation that someone's going to want to go out and work on these really, really high level, in my experience, high level issues that don't feel like my immediate basic needs, then I understand 100% why are still missing a lot of people in some of these other community conversations.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, how long ago did Maslow come up with the hierarchy of needs? I mean, it's still relevant. I mean, people got to have safety, security, and food and shelter right before they can start thinking about some of the higher level things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't believe that it's from a lack of interest or that, wow, that doesn't mean anything to me or it's not important to me. But if my basic needs are right here, that's the scope, and we need to respond.
A big part of running for office, whether it be good or bad, is raising funds. Can you talk about what it's like to raise funds as a political candidate?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that question 12 weeks ago would probably be a little different than it is right now, just based on our circumstance. One of the things that to me is really, we talked a little bit earlier about just the process of running for office. And when people talk about politics, like why a lot of people really anymore feel very disconnected from that. And now I'm starting to understand that in a new way. And I say that because to me, in local politics, everyday people should have an opportunity to use their skills and their perspectives and their diverse backgrounds and career to help lead. And my biggest concern with this race from a local standpoint is that the money that's now being raised specifically in this race is obscene.
Hmm.
And
How much? How much is being raised right now?
so my opponent has raised, and I don't know the exact numbers right now, but when we last took a look, it was over $165,000. And
Wow.
that's more than the salary because this is a full-time job. But the bigger piece to me, that's way more than anybody's ever raised for this particular race. And that sends a real message to me and community folks that one, the party's going to make the decision about who is a candidate for these races. But the long-term effect of that, Talis, is really for me, from a community standpoint, really disconcerting and disappointing because I think about my previous students. I think about the young women that I mentor over at Front Range Community College. And I've been guilty as well of telling my own students, like, just keep working, like, adelante, si se puede. And then I'm seeing these systems that's like, ooh, that's how we respond to
Yeah.
community people who want to be part of our leadership. Because if we start now, which is already being done by special interests who are funding another campaign, we're telling local people like me, you're a single mom, you're a teacher, you're don't even try
Mm.
as you build that higher and higher. And I think that's really interesting because from a national stage and from a state stage, I feel like general community people don't like to see the way that money's raised or used. And we think about some of our ballot initiatives here in Boulder County over the last few years, and we look at Prop C and things like that. The amount of money that is used in politics, period, and locally could have done so much more work. And that's the one thing about running for office that frankly doesn't feel good. And I've told people, like, this was already part of this system before I decided to run. This has been a conversation that's been built up, but we haven't been able to, for whatever reason, we've chosen to continue it, and we haven't put a real stop on how money is raised. And we're not asking the real tough questions about, or what could we be doing with those millions of dollars that are raised in the state of Colorado on ballot initiatives, on candidate races. And that's the unfortunate piece. And it's really almost sad. And especially right now when we look at COVID and we've got all these different nonprofits like philanthropies trying to help undocumented families. We've got the Community Foundation in Boulder County who's raised over $500,000 right away. Another gal, I can't think of the name of it, they raised $1 million in a couple of weeks to work specifically on PPE. And then we think about this other money that we're having to raise as candidates. And that's the one conflict I have for sure, learning more about running for office and how the system works.
Marta, thanks so much. We've really had a great discussion today. Do you have
Thank
any resources or pages you'd like to ask our audience to check out?
Yeah, absolutely. And on the campaign specifically, so the website's marta2020.org. It's marta2020.org. And we're on social media at Marta for BOCO. And so there's some different opportunities there for people to take a look and check it out. And, really right now, the ask is to get involved and check it out. And one of the pieces we kind of touched on, but not in depth, is the fact that we have a lot of folks who don't vote, not just in this country, but in our county. We also have a lot of folks who don't even know that they're eligible to vote in a primary, because that's part of the changes that have happened. So unaffiliated voters in Colorado can vote in the primary. We've already tackled and addressed in Colorado the mail-in ballot issue. So we're a step ahead. Like, we really don't have a reason not to vote. And yet it makes sense that if people aren't trained to vote in a primary specifically, and if they don't even know about it because they're thinking they already had a primary because of the national primary, there's some confusion. And even for people who are really involved in party politics, I got some of those same questions. So some of it's going to be education right now, checking in with your neighbors, just like the census. We're doing that right now. Are you asking your neighbors and your colleagues, et cetera, if they've signed up for the census, and have you asked them about their voting?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I consider myself politically savvy, but I didn't even know there was an election coming up in a few weeks. So it's really easy to miss if you're not paying attention.
Right, and I think that goes back to that piece of, if you're not paying attention, and if that is not your network, then you wouldn't know. And so that's the even more important part of getting more people together and collaborating in different ways, because we're still missing people on all these big issues, and voting is one of them.
When is election day again?
So the primary ballots will go out on June 8th, and you have to have it in and completed by June 30th.
Thank you, Marta. It's great information. And good luck to you this coming election. For all of you out there who are looking to vote, please take the opportunity and check out the candidates. It's important to be engaged in your community, and voting is an important part of that. So until next time, stay savvy.